السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين، أما بعد، فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم صلاة وسلاما عليك يا سيدي يا حبيبي يا رسول الله صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم. All praise is due to Allah, the Creator, the Sustainer. Peace, blessings and salutations upon the greatest of His creation, Muhammadur Rasulullah Sallallahu ta'ala Alaihi Wasallam. Alhamdulillah, we have been discussing in regard to the Seerah of Rasulullah Sallallahu ta'ala Alaihi Wasallam, which we will be continuing with chapter 4, part 4, which talks of the 6th year of prophethood. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, we learnt in chapter 4, part 3 in regard to the 5th year of prophethood when the people migrated to Habsha. During the 6th year of prophethood, which we are discussing in this part, it was a year in which the respect of the Muslims was strengthened. Why? Because two individuals who are highly respected in the society accepted Islam. Sayyidina Hamza radiyallahu ta'ala an and Hazrat Umar Farooq radiyallahu ta'ala an accepted Islam in the 6th year of prophethood. You must know and we must learn that Sayyidina Hamza radiyallahu ta'ala an was the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu ta'ala Alaihi Wasallam, and amongst all the uncles of Rasulullah Sallallahu ta'ala Alaihi Wasallam, Rasulullah Sallallahu ta'ala Alaihi Wasallam had unique love for Sayyidina Hamza radiyallahu ta'ala an. And the reason was because he was a fair and just individual, and also he was a few years older than Rasulullah Sallallahu ta'ala Alaihi Wasallam. And remember that Sayyidina Hamza radiyallahu ta'ala an drank the milk of Thuwayba during his childhood. And because Sayyidina Hamza drank the milk of Thuwayba, he became the foster brother of Rasulullah Sallallahu ta'ala Alaihi Wasallam. And who is Thuwayba? Thuwayba is the same slave which was freed by Abu Lahab upon hearing the news of the birth of Rasulullah Sallallahu ta'ala Alaihi Wasallam, who said to her that, "Go, you are free." And after his death, when he was seen in a dream by some of his family members who asked him his condition, Abu Lahab pointed to this finger and said, "After being separated from you, I have received nothing to eat or drink except water which flows from this finger of mine, from which I had freed Thuwayba because of the good news which he gave to Abu Lahab, and he freed her." Look at the reward he is getting just because of freeing the slave upon the good news, hearing the good news of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam coming into this world. We as the Muslim Ummah today, we thank Allah, we gather and have gatherings and thank Allah for sending us this mercy upon mankind, Muhammadur Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. May Allah make our gatherings a means of intercession, inshallah. Coming back to the discussion, that Thuwayba, Hazrat Hamza radiyallahu ta'ala an drank milk from Thuwayba, making him the foster brother of Rasulullah Sallallahu ta'ala Alaihi Wasallam. Sayyidina Hamza radiyallahu ta'ala an was a very strong and athletic person who used to spend his days in hunting. After returning, he would make tawaf of the Kaaba and sit amongst the leaders of the Quraysh. He was once informed by his sister, Bibi Safiya radiyallahu ta'ala anha, and the slave girl of Ibn Judman, when he returned from hunting, that his nephew, the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu ta'ala Alaihi Wasallam, had been treated to very offensively by Abu Jahl. He was given the news by his sister Bibi Safiya and the slave girl of Ibn Jubman when he returned from hunting that the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was treated very offensively by Abu Jahl. The uncle of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala, became enraged by this and set out to find Abu Jahl, carrying in his hand the bow and the arrow used for hunting. He found Abu Jahl in the haram of the Kaaba and struck him with his bow over his head, a strike so forceful that it began to bleed. He continued, Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala continued to say that how dare you swear at my nephew Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He further continues and says, be cautious, I have accepted Islam. Seeing this, the members of Bani Makhzum stood up to assist Abu Jahl, who, fearing revenge from the Banu Hashim, said, leave Hamza alone. Today indeed I swore his nephew with words unbecoming of him. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, Hazrat Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an accepted Islam, and you can see the love he had for the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. Today we as believers, we claim to have the love of Rasulullah Sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, but is our love, our actions really showing the love for Rasulullah Sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam? Are our actions really portraying, are they really displaying that we love Rasulullah Sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, or are we just saying it by the mouth? Look at the companions, look at the uncle of Rasulullah Sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. Subhanallah, my fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, may Allah guide us to act upon Islam and to love the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in such a manner that our actions should speak that we love the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, look at the love they had. Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an went to Abu Jahl. Why? Because he swore and he spoke offensively to the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Subhanallah. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, when Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an accepted Islam, after his acceptance, he read a few couplets very audibly to pass a message to the kuffar, and he said that Hamidullah حين هدى فوادي إلى الإسلام والدين الحنيف. I praise Allah for when He granted my heart the deen of Islam and guidance to the deen Hanif. When the laws of Islam, he further continues with his couplets and he says, when the laws of Islam are delivered before us, it brings tears to even the most intellectual self. Allah's Ahmad, the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, is our leader. Hence kuffar disregard conquering him with your false ramblings. And he continues to say that, so by Allah, we will never let the kuffar seize him. Fala wallahi, he says that by Allah, we will never let the kuffar seize him, and are prepared to draw our swords against them to decide our fate. Subhanallah, my fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, he knows that the kuffar are against the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but still he reads these couplets audibly to pass a message to them that he praises Allah for when he granted his heart the deen of Islam and the guidance of deen Hanif. Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar. This was the acceptance of Sayyidina Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. In our discussion, as I mentioned, we also have the acceptance of Sayyidina Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala anh, which is a beautiful incident in regard to how we accepted Islam. And after the acceptance of Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an, Sayyidina Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an entered the deen of Islam 3 days later. And one narration, there are two narrations of how we accepted Islam. We will go through both of them. The first narration in regard to how he accepted Islam is that Sayyidina Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an once set out with his sword in his hand. And what was the reason? The reason was that he wanted to take the life of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And subsequently, he met with Hazrat Nu'aym ibn Abdullah Qurayshi, radiallahu ta'ala an, who had just entered Islam, but his entering of Islam, Hazrat Nu'aym ibn Abdullah's entering of Islam was not known to Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an, and it was not publicly declared. Hazrat Nu'aym asked that, "Oh Umar, where are you going in this mid-heat with a sword in your hand?" He replied, Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an replied that, "I intend making the target of this sword Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who is the founder of Islam." Hearing this, Hazrat Nu'aym radiallahu ta'ala an responded, "You should first put your house in order. Your sister Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha and her husband Sa'id ibn Zayd have both accepted Islam." Thus the intention and direction of Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an, remember that he has set out to target the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But when Hazrat Nu'aym ibn Abdullah is telling him in regard to his sister, and he says that put your house in order, Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an's attention and direction has changed directly towards the house of his sister. And when he reaches to the house, he knocks on the door and calls the people inside who were softly reciting the Quran. Subhanallah. When they heard this, they began to panic. Why? Because Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an was knocking on the door, and it made them panic because they were reading the Quran so softly. They abandoned the pages of the Quran and sought a place to hide. Hazrat Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, the sister of Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an, opened the door for Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an, who entered and immediately began to shout, "You've also accepted Islam." He caught his brother-in-law, trampled him onto the ground and began to fist him. Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, the sister of Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an, stepped in and attempted to save her husband and received a hit, Allahu Akbar, so severe that her earring broke off and fell to the ground. She then said then she said to the brother Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala, "Umar, do whatever you please." Allahu Akbar, subhanallah. Listen to this, my fellow brothers and sisters in Islam. She says to Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an, that do whatever you please, because Islam will never leave our hearts. Subhanallah. This caused Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an to stand in amazement, and due to seeing the blood which was dripping from the sister's face, and he was standing there and looking at his sister whose face was dripping with blood. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, he stood there for a while silently and finally said to his sister, "Show me what you are reading." Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, who was the sister of Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an, when he stood there silently looking at his sister's face and looking at the blood dripping from his sister's face, and when he stood there and he asked her, "Show me what you are reading," Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha thereafter took some pages of the Quran and placed it before him. He lifted it up to see the following ayah. The ayah is as follows, which says that "Sabbaha lillahi ma fis samawati wal ard wa huwa al-aziz Hakim." What is the meaning of the ayah? Whatever is in the heavens and in the earth, glorify Allah, and it is He, the esteemed one, the wise. Allahu Akbar, subhanallah. What a beautiful verse of the Holy Quran, that whatever is in the heavens and in the earth are making the tasbih of Allah. They are glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He is the esteemed. Allah is the esteemed one, and Allah is the wise. Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an was beginning to experience a revolution in his life. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, with each and every word of the ayah conveying a new sense of truth to Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an, his body started to shiver. He was shivering as he read the verse, and when he reached the ayah which said, "Aminu billahi wa rasuli," believe in Allah and His Messenger, Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala uncontrollably called out the kalima of Islam and became a Muslim. He subsequently, my fellow brothers in Islam, my fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, remember that he was going to make the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam the target today with the sword in his hand. But when Hazrat Nu'aym ibn Abdullah says that go and sort your house out first, and when he goes to the house to his sister, he attacks his brother-in-law, and he also hurts his sister that the blood is dripping from her face, and he stands there silently and asks for the pages and asks to see what they are reading. And when he reads the verses of the Quran, that whatever is in the heaven and in the earth is glorifying Allah. And when he comes to the ayah, Aminu billahi wa rasulih, when he reads this ayah, believe in Allah and His Messenger, uncontrollably he accepts the kalima of Islam and becomes a Muslim. Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, look at the effect of the Quran. Look at the effect on the hearts of the people who are disbelievers. We today as Muslims are not reading the Quran, and many of us have forgotten how to read the Quran. May Allah guide us to learn how to read the Quran and to understand the meaning of the Quran. If the kuffar can accept Islam, those who have not accepted Islam can accept Islam by listening and hearing the Quran. We as Muslims, undoubtedly, surely, if we are to understand the meaning of Quran, we will make it a guidance of our life. We will make it the main means and the main following of our life, and we will leave all the Western cultures and all those cultures which are not in accordance to the Quran and the hadith of Rasulullah Sallallahu, Alaihi Wasallam. May Allah guide us to read and understand the Quran, inshaAllah. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, when Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an, you have seen that he has accepted Islam. He subsequently, when he accepted Islam, he subsequently went to the house of Hazrat Arqam ibn Arqam, where Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was at the time. He knocked on the door and waited. Those inside then looked through the peephole to find that Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala anhu is standing before them with a sword in his hand, in terror. None could have the courage of opening for him until Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu said, let him in. If he comes in with good intent, he'll be welcome. Otherwise, the same sword he carries will be instrumental in slaying his head. The door was open, and as Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala anhu stepped in, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself advanced forward and held Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala anhu by the shoulders, saying, O son of Khattab, publicly announce your acceptance of Islam. Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala replied by loudly proclaiming the kalima again. When Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam heard this, he became overwhelmed with joy and announced the takbir, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. This takbir was said so loud by those present that the mountains of Makkah began to tremble. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, remember that Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala has accepted Islam. He subsequently goes to the house of Arqam ibn Arqam, where Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was at the time. He knocks on the door. No one had the courage to open the door, but Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala says that let him come in. If he comes with good intent, he will be welcome, or the same sword will be instrumental in slaying his head. When he enters the house, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam steps forward, puts his hand on his shoulders and says that, O son of Khattab, publicly announce your acceptance of Islam. Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala replied by loudly proclaiming the kalima again. When Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam heard this, he became overwhelmed with joy and announced the takbir, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. This takbir was said so loud by those present that the mountains of Makkah began to tremble. Allahu Akbar. Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala said to Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that, Ya Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, why do we secretly perform ibadah? Let's perform it in the haram of the Kaaba. By Allah, I will now openly declare my acceptance of Islam to all gatherings against Islam I was part of before accepting the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Then marched to the Kaaba with two lines of people, including Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala and Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an. He entered the haram in this glorious fashion and performed salah there, and after which Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala announced his embracement of Islam to the kuffar, the disbelievers. cornered him and began to throw their punches at him, but received a few blows as well. When this was seen, the beating was seen of his nephew of Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala by Abu Jahl. He was told of Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala accepting Islam. He proceeded to the Hatim of the Kaaba and said that I take Umar into my protection, which resulted in the kuffar withdrawing from the struggle. Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala states, I should always fight with the kuffar after becoming Muslim, and was struck by them as well until Islam triumphed over them by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, we have heard the struggle of all the companions. We have heard the struggle of Rasulullah Sallallahu, Alaihi Wasallam, the companions. We heard in regard to Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala. And now we can see that Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala was attacked by the kuffar throwing punches at him. But Abu Jahl, when he saw the beating of his nephew, who was Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala, he was told that Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala accepted Islam, but he proceeded to the Hatim of the Kaaba and said, I take Umar under my protection, which resulted in the kuffar withdrawing from the struggle. Hazrat Umar states that he should always fight with the kuffar after becoming Muslim. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, you can learn from the incident that what sort of sacrifices they did for Islam. May Allah guide us to sacrifice our time, inshallah. Another documented incident contributing to Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala's acceptance of Islam is that he narrates that he was once near the idols of the Quraysh before embracing Islam. And at that time, someone had slaughtered a calf and sacrificed it in the name of the idols. Someone had slaughtered a calf and sacrificed it in the name of the idols. And there was a voice heard saying that, O open enemies, a successful person will soon appear and very eloquently declare there is no God but Allah. Those who were close at hand panicked and ran away. Whilst Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an says that he chose to remain behind and find the one responsible. He says that I then unexpectedly heard the voice again, that, O open enemies, a successful person will soon appear and very eloquently declare there is no God but Allah. He says, Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala says that time there was no one present near the idols but himself. Immediately after this, Rasulullah Sallallahu, Alaihi Wasallam announced his prophethood, and Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala became greatly affected by what had occurred. This has also been accepted as a reason for his entering into Islam. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, remember that when this torture and when these problems had reached to its peak, Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala was taken into the protection of As ibn Wa'il Sahmi. And As ibn Wa'il Sahmi had taken Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala into his protection, through which he managed to escape further torment of the disbelievers. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, you can see that the kuffar were not willing to see anyone who was accepting Islam. They were not willing to see that Islam was spreading so much and people were accepting Islam. Whoever was accepting Islam was going through the torment and the torture of the kuffar. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, I always emphasize on this point, and this is one point which we should take as a lesson, that they have sacrificed their lives, they sacrificed their wealth, they sacrificed everything for the sake of Islam. And we as Muslims today, what is happening to us, that we are failing to sacrifice our time. We are failing to follow the 5 fundamentals of Islam, which is not an option, it's an obligation. My fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, we learned in today's discourse in regard to the acceptance of Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala and the acceptance of Sayyidina Sayyidina Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an, which were two individuals who were highly respected in the society, which strengthened the respect of the Muslims in the society. And my fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, they went through so much of struggle. After accepting Islam, we can learn and we can see that Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala an, when he announced his acceptance of Islam, he was also hurt by the kuffar, and how he accepted Islam is such a beautiful incident. And we can see that the effect of the Quran there's so much of effect of the Quran on the heart that we as believers today, we have to ask Allah to guide us to read the Quran and understand it daily in our lives, inshallah. Make the Quran and the Hadith the means of our life which we should follow. I ask Allah to forgive me for any mistakes during the discourse whilst translating the ayahs of the Quran or mentioning the Seerah or narrating the Hadith of Rasulullah Sallallahu, Alaihi Wasallam. I ask Allah to forgive me. I make tawbah if I have made any mistake. May Allah forgive me. I ask Allah to accept whatever has been said and make it a means of intercession and make it a means of guidance. May Allah guide us to follow the Quran and the Hadith of Rasulullah Sallallahu, Alaihi Wasallam. May Allah guide us to perform our 5 times salah with Jamaat. May Allah guide us. May Allah guide us to sacrifice time for the sake of Islam. And when we leave from this world, we leave with the kalima La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Insha'Allah, we will continue with chapter 4, part 5, which will be in regard to the 7th year of prophethood. Once again, I ask Allah to forgive me for any mistakes during my discourse and mentioning the seerah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. وَمَا تَوْفِيقِي إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ أَسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهِ وَآخِرُ دَعْوَانَا عَنِ الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.